My name is Dana Fisher. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. I research and write about climate politics and activism of all sorts, and I'm currently a contributing author to the IPCC's Sixth Assessment Review. I serve as a board member for Tayloe, and I will be moderating tonight's conversation. Tonight, we have a wonderful slate of panelists. We have Sara Blazevic, who is a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement and is currently serving as the managing director of Sunrise. She's a Croatian New Yorker. We have Anthony Rogers-Wright. He's serving as the director of environmental justice with New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. And before that, he was a policy coordinator and the Green New Deal lead for Climate Justice Alliance and its members. And last but certainly not least, we have Kerene Tayloe. She's a social justice advocate who has worked tirelessly in the areas of environmental justice, civil rights, and voter protection. She's currently serving as the Director of Federal Legislative Affairs at We Act for Environmental Justice. We have so much tonight to talk about, given what we learned about the efforts of the Biden administration through its Climate Day yesterday. I thought I would start with a quick question for everybody to tell us a little bit about your personal work and tell us a little about how we got to the current moment in terms of climate change, in terms of climate justice, the intersecting crises that are taking place, and to the degree that it's relevant to you, the role that your faith has played. I think I'll start with Sara.
Thanks, Dana, and thanks, everyone. Good to be with you all. I'm Sara. Well, I will start by saying that one reason that I'm here is because of a Jew named Bernard Sanders, who some of you may have heard of. So the kind of quick and dirty version of getting to this moment as Sunrise is that myself and other young activists in the climate movement were watching the 2016 primary race, watching the lead up to that election. And I remember really distinctly seeing Bernie in a debate talk about the fossil fuel billionaires and talk about how it was the same small handful of elites that were responsible for the climate crisis, who are also the people responsible for the housing crisis, who are also the people profiting off of mass incarceration, and just telling the story really beautifully of how climate change and economic justice and racial justice are really woven together and how they have really common villains in all of those stories. And I remember watching him and just thinking like, wow, he's telling this story so clearly. It's so powerful. Why isn't our movement really putting it this simply? And at the same time, I watched, millions and millions of young people really come out of the woodwork in support of his campaign. And seeing that and seeing all of the young people who were really in search of a political home, in search of a way to feel a sense of purpose in the face of all the crises that have shaped all of our lives was what catalyzed me and others to come together and start Sunrise. So that's a big part of why I'm here. Another reason why I'm here is because of my family and is another part of my my Jewish story, I guess, which is that I come from people who fought fascism on both sides of my family. On my Jewish side, my grandparents were members of the Communist Party. My great-grandparents were working class Jewish immigrants who came to this country and who really who assimilated into whiteness and into America through joining the labor movement and through joining the organized left. And on my Croatian side, I have proud partisan grandparents who fought the Nazis as part of a multi-ethnic anti-fascist coalition that liberated Yugoslavia. And I share that because I feel incredibly proud of my family and of where I come from, and have always seen my Jewishness really inextricably tied up with what I care about and with why I'm here and with fighting for liberation. And I also want to share that because it feels like this panel is coming at a moment of really big climate news, and also a moment where a lot of Jews might be feeling more kind of activated or triggered around our Jewishness than we normally do. Just a few weeks ago, we saw Confederates carrying Nazi flags and Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts through the halls of our democracy, and it feels like a really important moment to be visibly Jewish and to name the ways in which, as Jews, we have a moral mandate to stand with all people fighting and resisting oppression and fighting for liberation, and to remember the ways in which that is a deep part of our tradition. So I think I will leave it at that for now.
That's great. Thank you so much. Anthony, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's great to be here. Thank you so much to Tayloe and to you, Dana, for facilitating this really great panel of talented people. You know, being an African-American Jew and being African-American in general, something that one of my mentors, the great Elizabeth Yampierre, executive director of Uprose, always says is that for those of us who struggle with, organize with, and represent frontline environmental justice communities that are on the front lines of this climate crisis, hit first and worst. We didn't get into this work because we necessarily wanted to. It was a calling, but it was a call to duty because our communities, which still are being assaulted, rendered into sacrifice zones through a massive pogroms of dehumanization that are fueled by the three root causes of climate change. The pipelines and the fossil fuel infrastructure, that's real. The emissions, that's real. But those are the symptoms. The root causes are white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonization. And for some people who are indigenous to the stolen lands known today as North America, this struggle has been centuries long. So what got me, into this space was not so much the Bill McKibbins or the Naomi Kleins of the world, but the Peggy Shepherds, who Kerene can speak to even more than I can, and the Dr. Robert Bullards, who are writing books like Dumping in Dixie and Wrong Complexion for Protection. And it's interesting because being an African American Jew is kind of like being African American in climate spaces. It's a perpetual struggle for visibility and to not be treated as ineffable or secondary. That's what brings me to this work. My people, whether they're Jewish, and especially my Black people, have been invisibilized, have been dehumanized. For all the talk, an important talk, an imperative talk about Keystone XL Pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline, and Line 3, which we all need to get more involved with. I would also remind people that before these pipelines of death, there is a community known as Cancer Alley that precluded McKibbin's book, The End of Nature in 1989. Cancer Alley still remains. And the bottom line is that why are we not seeing so much shine? If it was Cancer Scarsdale or Cancer Chappaqua or Cancer Beverly Hills, this issue we know would have been taken care of by now. So what I see when I approach climate change is I see the same things that are impacting Jewish and Black people: white supremacy, and anti-Semitism, and dehumanization. And where we are right now, we have seen, for instance, the Biden administration lifting up in environmental justice, and this is from years of work, like people who Kerene works with, Peggy Shepard, going back to 1991. We talk about the Green New Deal these days, but it makes me wonder. What if we would have followed and really taken to light the 1991 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, which I would argue go even farther than what we saw in the Green New Deal resolution? What if we would have taken seriously a 1990 letter by the Southwest Organizing Project in coordination when they had to send a letter to historically white-led organizations, some that were founded by white supremacists who dehumanize Black people and indigenous people, to tell them that you're not hearing us, and in fact your guild is actually quite racist and certainly not anti-racist. As it pertains to my faith, I mean, it really goes back to probably my favorite Torah passage, Devarim, Deuteronomy 16:20, Sedek, Sedek, Tirdof, and justice, justice you shall pursue. Justice is not something that's pursued when it's convenient, right? This is something that has to be done every single day, with all of our fiber. We know that as Jewish people, we are allowed to break the blessed Shabbat in order to save a life. So to that end, I think that all Jewish people should be fighting for climate justice and environmental justice on Shabbat, whether you're Orthodox, Reform, or Reconstructionist, because Hashem would say you are actually in the process of saving lives, right? The climate crisis is not some temporal aspect that's going to happen years from now. It's happening, right now. People's lives are being cut short through a process of slow genocide, whether it's pipelines on sovereign indigenous territory or the rendering of sacrifice zones in Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian Pacific Islander, and poor white communities across the country, whether we're talking about the Bronx, whether we're talking about the Gulf Coast, whether we're talking about the West Coast. I like to say there's no such thing as the deep South. There's deep America, and that's the bottom line. And as Jewish people, as climate activists, we have to confront some of the most powerful entities ever known. And as our sister Sarah said, having elders and ancestors who took on one of the biggest scourges in the world of almost global fascism in the form of the Third Reich and Hitler's Nazis, that's the same fervor that we have to apply to this climate crisis, right? It's not theoretical anymore. It's not about getting into debates on whether it's real or not, right? We do not pay any mind to people who are myopic and feckless enough to deny something like the Shoah, the Holocaust, right? We know that what they're saying is not rooted in reality. The same thing goes for climate denialism. And I would argue that the amount of lives that have been taken from us and that will be taken from us still, we do need to approach this as if it is an approaching Holocaust right now. So that's what brings me here. That's what keeps me fighting. And what also keeps me fighting is incredible sisters like Sara and Kerene, who I'm honored to be in the struggle with.
Great. Well, Kerene,
Yeah.
please share your perspective.
Well, good evening. My name is Kerene Tayloe. Really honored to be here and to share. When I think about my personal story and what got me to this place where I can say that I have the opportunity to work in the environmental justice movement, it's literally the life that I have as a first generation Jamaican parents, immigrant coming to America, and growing up here and not knowing the terms that I now can use very easily to describe our experience, but trying to figure out why my youngest brother was really stifled by asthma. And now as an adult working in this area, I can connect that to indoor air quality and the poor, the poor condition of the apartment that my parents had at the time. Or the fact that when I, as an adult, can go for a run and within blocks and miles, communities change very easily. And Black and Brown communities typically aren't going to have access to the best grocery stores or green spaces. And knowing that that's in direct correlation to systemic racism in our country and how our communities, through whether it's the transportation sector or just straight out through the decisions of cities and governments and municipalities and corporations for that matter, who have made Black people in our communities as the sacrifice zone for more affluent communities, for white communities. And so my work as an environmental justice advocate is to come into this space, and I hadn't always thought about it as polar bears or trees, et cetera, but it was literally about the lives of people who look like me, who did not have the same access to clean air, who did not have access to water that was clean, et cetera. Like we think about the children and the families in Flint, Michigan right now, and while that may have grabbed national attention, the reality is there are tons of Flints throughout this country because of the poor infrastructure and lack of resources and disinvestment, particularly in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. So I'm really fortunate to do this work as a young lawyer, also coming up through historically Black colleges and universities in this country that were frankly the only places where Black people could get an education for a while. For a very long time, I got to learn about the civil rights movement. And now as an environmental justice advocate, there's a direct connection between the work that many in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and 70s did to the environmental justice movement. There's a direct correlation. When we think about the life of MLK, who everyone wants to say, you know, I have a dream and all of these really great things, he did more than that. And the last action that he had was in Memphis on behalf of the sanitation workers. And that's a real strong example of environmental injustices and having to advocate for communities and advocate for better working conditions and fair pay and a whole host of things. So my work is here as a Black person. People ask me, you know, are you a tree hugger? All of this stuff. I'm like, no, I care about Black people. I want us to live the life that everyone else has access to, but because of the treatment that we've had in the country, we've frankly been denied or just really limited by. And so when I think also about my faith, I'm not Jewish, I'm Christian. And I enter into this space not only thinking about the many Black churches who were part of the civil rights movement and were the center of activism, but also one of my favorite scriptures, and I used it when I founded the Environmental Law Society at Florida A&M College of Law, was there is hope for a tree that if it's cut down, it will sprout again and its new shoots will not fail. And that's Job 14:7. And I hope, my hope, not only for trees and for nature, but for people, is that we can work together to address climate change, but do it in a lens that has to address systemic racism, has to address economic disinvestment, and how systems have been set up on purpose to create the communities that we see that are not able to thrive. So I'm really honored to be here and to share, to be here with all of the great panelists, Anthony, Sara, Dana. I appreciate you moderating, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation tonight.
Peeking out from the chat behind the curtain, hopefully Dana will be back. We are about to get a big storm in Southern California here as well. And I know internet has been wild all over the country. My name is Vicki Kaplan, and I'm organizing director at Dainu, who helped facilitate and put together this esteemed panel. Really glad y'all are here. I know that Dana wanted to ask next for each of you to share your perspective from your organizing work. Like, what has led us to this moment, both of multiple intersecting crises, the pandemic, the climate crisis, the resurgence of white nationalism, all the multiple intersecting crises, and at the same time, this moment of just yesterday, the flurry of executive orders that, from my perspective, lift right off the page of what I've seen a lot of you as leaders and your organizations and your movements put out there for years and years. So I'd love to hear from each of you and share with our audience like what you see as sort of leading to this current moment, both the hopeful and the good, and the terrifying. And whoever feels, there's no order here, whoever feels moved to just jump in, go for it.
Well, I think the reality is, as a country, particularly as a Western world, what has led us here is just the devaluing of people and prioritizing profit at any and all costs. And the frank reality too is these systems of capitalism require someone to be at the bottom, and those people have been Black, brown, and indigenous people, poor whites, frankly, we are consistently facing a country that's unwilling to even address its issues around how we treat marginalized communities. And until we get to that place, we're going to continue to see a resurgence of white people who now are storming, you know, our U.S. Capitol. Like, while I wasn't surprised what happened on January 6th, it was incredibly disheartening to see and very terrifying. I live about 4 miles from the U.S. Capitol. So we're facing our demons. And I think also there's a feeling amongst some white people, and particularly white men who've been really good at holding power for generations, that their time and their reckoning is here. And as more people of color come to power, as we see people, like we look at what happened in Georgia and how, frankly, voter suppression had kept generations of people in Georgia down, but through really strong organizing, we saw how Black people asserted themselves in a way to take back the Senate on behalf of the Democrats. There's fear there that when others take the lead or in power, then somewhere or another, there's a scarcity mindset that then you are losing something too, especially if your holding of that power was through suppression, was through, scare tactics and just putting other people down on purpose. And so as we do things, hopefully in a more moral and ethical and bringing more people to the table, people who don't have that mindset of community organizing or building feel threatened. And so what we're seeing right now, just economically, is the existence of that. As it relates to the climate crisis, all of that's connected too. Our country has been powered by fossil fuel and extractive energies for its entire time. And there is an outcome of that, which is the disproportionate impact of climate change on people of color communities more than any other group. And so we shouldn't be surprised about what's happening. And the reality is, instead of being fearful, how do we act proactively together to address it as quickly as possible so that we can live to see another 50 years, another 100 years? So I think that's what's brought us here today.
Thank you so much, Kerene. And I want to just lift up one of the many gorgeous things that you shared, that like, without a community organizer's mindset, right, where does all of this whirlwind, where can it lead people? And how much I think as an organizer myself, I sometimes overlook how much that perspective and having a sense of history and movement building and strategy and community, how that changes one's outlook for what's possible. So it's sort of a mantra of having a community organizer mindset to get us through a lot of what we're facing right now. And Dana is back. So I'm going to hand the panel back to you, Dana. And I'm here to help out if I can.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we're having a windstorm here and our Wi-Fi went down, but I'm on my daughter's hotspot, so I should be fine. I apologize, everybody. Well, Kerene, thank you so much for talking about your perspective and your experience and your thoughts about organizing and what happened recently. I'm wondering if Sara and then Anthony also want to provide some perspective. I'm particularly interested, Sara, if you could talk a little bit about your experiences focusing particularly on young people, as well as the way that Sunrise perceives the Civilian Climate Corps and what needs to be done to move forward with that.
Yeah, certainly. So, wow, so much to say about how we got here, and Kerene painted a lot of that picture. So I'll just maybe add one thing on that, which is that I feel like what happened on January 6th actually presented one of the most visible representations of like the history of this country and the choices that face us that I have witnessed. I woke up that Wednesday morning to my phone totally blowing up with the news from Georgia, and was in text chats filled with high schoolers from Clayton County, from Gwinnett County outside of Atlanta, just texting, congratulating each other, being like, is it real? Is it real? Did we win? Just completely floored at John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock's wins that night. And that morning was like one of the happiest and most hopeful mornings that I've experienced in certainly 4 years, but maybe longer, because it felt like multiracial democracy won. It felt like a Black and Jewish coalition that was explicitly like, we are Black people and Jewish people standing together against the anti-Semitic and racist attacks that our opponents are leveraging against us, had won. And it was fueled by by decades of organizing led by Black women, led by community organizers who have been trying to resuscitate the corpse of the Democratic Party for a very long time to like protect our communities and our people. And with a lot of young people, including a lot of young people in Sunrise, really getting to throw down really hard. So that was just such a beautiful moment and such a symbolic victory in terms, I mean, obviously a very concrete victory, but also a very symbolic one in terms of, you know, showing us the type of multiracial solidarity and multiracial democracy that we need to build to get out of these crises that we face and to begin to undo the centuries of systemic oppression that Kerene talked about. And then only, you know, a mere 3 hours later, just after getting off of our massive Sunrise victory call, the news started coming in from DC, and we're watching these videos, and it felt like a total, you know, whiplash. So I think that day really made it clear that the work is not over. The work is obviously only just beginning, and we're in a moment where we need to pressure Democrats and Republicans alike to steer the path forward towards being the multiracial democracy that we need. So in terms of the climate victories yesterday and how I feel about those, what it feels like those mean. Clearly, they're massive, massive victories for all of our movements, and it makes it really clear that President Biden, you know, listened to our movements and is taking climate change really seriously. Is taking the scale of the crisis really seriously. I think it's really remarkable that in one day, with a couple strokes of the pen, President Biden did more on climate than Obama did in 2 terms. And I think it's really important to name that is not because, you know, somehow in his heart, President Biden cares more than Obama did. It's because our movements are in a really, really different place than they were 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And because we have people like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez actually in the halls of power championing some of these things, as well as a movement that is not willing to give Biden a grace period and is not willing to say, well, let's see what he does for a couple months. So I think it's just worth noting that you know, that movements did this, and the Civilian Climate Corps was not in Joe Biden's climate plan 1 year ago. The Office of Climate Mobilization, I'm actually not sure what it's officially called, but the demand that Sunrise had was for an Office of Climate Mobilization. That was not in his climate policy a year ago. And it's amazing. It's really inspiring to see policies, to see these executive orders pass that are going to create jobs for people, that are going to put people to work, and that are going to actually force the government to coordinate all of government mobilization around the climate crisis. But again, it's only the start, and there's much, much more that Biden can be doing just with his executive power. But I think more importantly, we need Congress to be able to pass legislation that can last, you know, beyond the next 2 to 4 years. And that will require Joe Biden to use his bully pulpit to actually be the organizer in chief and like build support within the Democratic Party and build support across this country for democracy reforms like ending the filibuster, which will actually make it possible to pass legislation at the scale required. In terms of just to hit on the question about young people a little bit, I mean, I think I'm no longer like the youngest people in the room at all, like I was when I was starting to organize in high school. And it's just amazing how both my generation and Gen Z, which is the younger generation than me, is just so relentlessly clear-eyed that we cannot give an inch to Joe Biden and to the Democratic Party, and that we cannot rest until we have won what we need. And I think it's been incredibly powerful getting to see all of the young people mobilized through this fight over the last year and the last couple months who are ready to keep going.
That's great. I think that I want to get back to and circle back to everybody, but specifically about thinking through the steps that need to take place and the ways that people should think through how to be persistent in this time to continue pushing for climate change. But first, I wanted to give Anthony a chance to speak. And I particularly was hoping he would tell us a little bit more about this Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection Act that was just introduced by Senator Markey and Representative Cori Bush today, to tell us a little bit about where you see it going, and maybe, but I also answer the rest of the questions, Anthony, but would love to hear about that as well.
No, of course, and I think it's all germane and all connected. I mean, what I'll say about policy in general is that, you know, it's a set of steps, right? It starts with a set of ideas and the development of those ideas, and then the process of coalescing them and catalyzing these ideas. And that really is a function of who is at the table, who is distributing these ideas, but also extremely important. And I think that as progressives, we forget about this too often. It's also about vigilance in the implementation of that policy. And you need to look no further than FDR's white supremacy capitulated New Deal, right? Great policies, but the way they were implemented impacted people who look like Kerene and I. And as a matter of fact, were very responsible via redlining in the creation of frontline communities, and have robbed the families and the ancestors of Kerene and I of generational wealth, right? You look at some people who were able to take advantage of the GI. The most, I believe, right now, the wealthiest corporation in the world is Apple. And Steve Jobs himself said that had his father not had access to the GI Bill, he would not have been able to start that corporation. That was taken away from Kerene and I. That was taken away from women who took part in domestic jobs, and indigenous people as well. So that's why it was so exciting to be a part of the press conference today with I call her the sister representative. Here we have in Cori Bush is a bona fide grassroots organizer in the People's House, right? Cori Bush is an organizer before she is a congresswoman, in the streets of Ferguson, you know, and when Black Lives Matter was engendered, and when it was more than a hashtag, when it was actually a set of actions as well. That's where Cori Bush comes from. And of course, Senator Markey, one of the architects of the Green New Deal, who has come a long way. Speaking of how policy has developed since the abysmal and ignominious failures of Waxman-Markey, which did not include people like Kerene and I, or even young people like Sara. And it all goes back to something that Vicky was saying earlier, that you cannot have good policy without good organizing. You know, if you have if policy without organizing will end up as Waxman-Markey did. And that's why, you know, you see this fervor of going back to Georgia, as Sister Sara was saying. This is years in the making, right? This goes back to Ella Baker and Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael going into Lowndes County, Alabama, and really fostering that local grassroots organizing and coming from the ground up, and rather than a top-down process, which is also not going to work for environmental justice communities. One of the things that I said during the press conference was that we do celebrate the policies and the introduction of the policies and the legislation so much, but what's lost a lot of the times is the process. And what Senator Markey and Representative Bush's staffs did was they included frontline grassroots environmental justice organizations who are going to be directly impacted by all of this legislation. And they were integral. Groups like Michigan Environmental Justice Council, groups like Got Green in Seattle, and then groups like Uprose in New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and so many others were extremely integral in writing this piece of policy with Senator Markey's incredible staff, along with Representative Bush's incredible staff. So What this does is that it moves us from just referring to environmental justice communities as this abstract entity, right, as a talking point. As my good comrade Cynthia Mayon likes to say, is environmental justice isn't an ingredient to put in a cup and stir, right? It is a specific thing. And these are real people facing real problems and real challenges. And this mapping bill is actually going to allow us to create, if you will, an environmental justice community census. And once we're able to do that, we will be able to prioritize where this, the Biden administration made a commitment to 40% of investments going to identified environmental justice in disadvantaged communities. The Justice 40 initiative that was named yesterday is a first step, as Sister Sarah was saying. But this is going to, I think, jumpstart of getting that from being an initiative to a process, because we cannot become complacent or quiescent now. As I said today, we cannot allow this 40% commitment to become the new 40 acres and a mule. This time we actually want to get paid out as Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. So very, very exciting. And then in terms of, like, how we got here, absolutely right. Me myself, I am a non-Marxist socialist and not as optimistic with the Democratic Party. I will always push. I have discussions with Karina about this all the time. And I do think that while these were good steps yesterday, absolutely, we heard a president who took the oath of office and then used the term white supremacy, and I would agree with Sarah that in some cases he has gone farther than Obama. But at the same time, we also know that a commitment to environmental justice can come across as vacuous when you will still allow a poisonous and harmful practice like fracking, which assaults the reproductive health of women, disproportionately impacts Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, assaults their tribal sovereignty, and profligate uses of water. And in this pandemic, right, where we know that there were some communities in Detroit, in New York, and other places where water was shut off, right? When we're told that a pandemic, you're supposed to wash your hands. That's what that water is supposed to be used for. It's been said that any population that purposely poisons their own water supply is just not sane. So we will have to continue to use the words of the president to be obstreperous when it comes to issues like fracking. And then, it's important that we lift up the fact that, yes, we got Keystone XL stopped for now. But what about line 3, where there are Indigenous people right now literally putting their bodies on the line, facing wanton police brutality and harassment, as well as the Dakota Access Pipeline, which everybody around the world knows about, which really was a shock, in a good way, to the system of capitalism and to the system of colonization. We will definitely need this president to go farther. As Sarah said as well, we have to be careful with resting our laurels on executive actions only, because they are ephemeral. We saw at one point our immigrant sisters and brothers and friends were feeling a bit safe with DACA. But because that was done by executive order, another president can come in and just wipe that out. And we can't we can't do that to people. We can't do that with the climate crisis, where the pendulum will swing from one way, and then we're going to have to spend all of this time, because as Sunrise has and so many others have said to us, if we have 10 years to really efficaciously address and dismantle this climate crisis, we have even less time to efficaciously confront and dismantle white supremacy and all of the factors that lead to dehumanization, which is what, again, got us here. This idea that land that was populated by people belonged, manifests destiny to someone else. You know what I mean? And that's why I say we have to shift and transform from a mindset of manifest destiny to a mindset of manifest empathy, because only when we see, as so many Jewish leaders back in the day, Joshua Abraham Heschel, it's just like, this is not right. I know what this feels like, and it hurts me to see this, right? We need to be hurt when we understand the fact that trans Black women have a life expectancy of only 33 to 35 years. You know what I mean? That empathy is what's going to call us to action, to really step up up our game, hold this administration accountable, hold this Congress accountable, get them to eliminate this Jim Crow white supremacist relic of a filibuster. So as Sister Sara said, we can get the policies across that are going to be transformational. But it's not just the economy and that we have to transform, it's also ourselves in the process. Because as I like to say, laws don't change attitudes, attitudes change laws.
Thank you so much. We don't have that much time left, so I want to ask one more quick question before we turn to the question and answer. I know there are questions that are coming in, and the quick question is just this. For anyone who is taking actions like meeting with members of Congress, writing letters, making calls, organizing, doing whatever they can to keep the pressure on right now, do you have specific advice about what, since we know what we know about yesterday's executive orders and what's coming next, or what we hope is coming next, about how individuals should be pushing forward? And I was hoping you guys could each give us a few minutes on that before we turn to the question and answer, please. Kerene, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I will say there is some important environmental justice legislation that was introduced last Congress that we are looking to support this Congress: Environmental Justice for All Act, the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Act, and familiarize yourself with the term legacy pollution and cumulative impact, because that's what we want. We want NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, to have teeth. We need environmental justice. In theory, has no laws behind it, and the legislative teeth and the executive orders that have been in place, we need those things to be codified. And so if you are genuinely interested in supporting our work and the movement and the lives that are impacted, call your congressman, your senator, and ask them to sponsor and then vote for the Environmental Justice for All Act. And if you yourself are looking for ways to become active within organizations, grassroots and EJ groups typically are mom and pop kinds of family-run organizations, and they need capacity, and capacity is money, capacity is time. And if you're able to give, we will gladly accept both, but also do it in a way where you are learning and you are stepping back and pushing and encouraging those communities to speak up for themselves and to lead for themselves. We know the solutions that we need, and if anything, share your platform. Don't come in and co-opt the space and take things over. So give us your money, give us your time. We know what to do. We just need to have the support to do it. Thank you.
Great. Sara, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think the main thing that comes to mind for me is that this is going to be a long fight. Sunrise talks about it as the decade of the Green New Deal. And, if you look on our website or on our Twitter, you'll find a million places where we're saying these next few months, these first 100 days are more important than ever. It's the most important couple of months. And that's true. And it's true that if we win everything we need to in the coming months, if we abolish the filibuster, if we pass, multi-trillion-dollar green recovery legislation that actually takes us big leaps and bounds forward towards stopping the climate crisis, then the rest of this year and next year will be an all-out brawl to defend those victories and to protect seats in the Senate and seats in the House, so that we don't just flip back into Republican control at the end of 2022 and lose all of this. So my main advice would be to join an organization that you want to be a part of. And there will always be many calls to make through WeAct, through Sunrise, through any of our organizations. We'll give you a million ways you can make calls and send in postcards and do those things day to day. But we're living in a time of crises, and we've had some major wins just recently, but we can't let up, and we have to be prepared for a long fight. So, check out your local. I know Dayenu has chapters, Sunrise has chapters, WeAct and affiliates have community organizations that they're connected with all over the country, and look into who's organizing in your community that you want to work alongside, that you can kind of make a longer commitment to. That would be my advice.
Great. I would just say that I know Diana has Diana circles as well that are connected to a bunch of Jewish communities around the country. So last but certainly not least, Anthony, tell us what you think.
I think that our sisters, brothers, and friends at Sunrise showed us the way when it was like, hey, we're going to wake up one day and we're going to sit in the ivory towers until we get what we want. The Speaker of the House, that was pretty cool. And by the way, that's the way to do it, right? You go in, you sing songs, you don't defecate, and you don't kill cops, and you don't wave Confederate flags. That's how you do it. So thank you, Sarah, and the Sunrise crew for showing us how to storm the Capitol the right way. But I would encourage people to also get familiar with some terms and some tenets that come from frontline communities and indigenous wisdom: just transition, energy democracy, food sovereignty, just recovery, and feminist economy. Care work is low carbon work, and there is no way that we are going to get to the regenerative economies that we have to get to in a patriarchal system that doesn't value the work of the people who are taking care of our children, taking care of our elders, and picking our food, right? The essential workers need essential protection. So as Kerene and Sarah said, yes, definitely go and speak to your member of Congress. But beyond that, speak to your city council members and speak to your county commissioners. There is vast and amazing power at the local level. And as a matter of fact, the history of this country has shown us that it is always typically a bottom-up process, from women's suffrage to slavery to marriage equality to marijuana legalization as well. And it is Tu B'Shabbat, so we should lift that up too. These are plants that grow on trees. But as Kerene was saying, it's important to get familiar with these terms. Just transition will confront any myopic idea that you have to choose between the climate and jobs, right? This idea that we have to have this massive fracked gas or fossil fuel energy system that can't be returned to the local level and decentralized and democratic and cooperatively owned. We saw just in Brooklyn, in BK, Uprose, Sunset Park, first community solar program in one of the poorest neighborhoods in all of New York City. And then food sovereignty and this idea of us having control over our food system. So not just food access. We don't need more Walmarts or big box food places. We can be in control of how we create our food, and that is also low carbon work. And then, as I said earlier, feminist rooted Green New Deal, feminist rooted regenerative economies. But don't lose sight of how much power there is at the local level. It was Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who said that sometimes when you get too much higher than the local level, things get lost, things get harder because you have to make what's known as political agreements. We've seen Green New Deals pass in cities like Seattle. We've seen just transition laws like SB 489 in the ancestral homes of our soon-to-be first Indigenous Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, in New Mexico, with a just transition framework. In Colorado, in Maine, and no disrespect to anyone from Maine, but Maine passed a just transition policy as well. Sarah's laughing, she knows what I mean, but that was also work of Sunrise, and not really a lot of people who look like Kerene and I in Maine, but big up to Maine anyway, and we're proud of that. So learn these terms and fight at the local level. This is a bottom-up process that is trying to leverage federal dollars and federal power from the top down to the people on the ground. So Congress people, city council members, state legislatures, county commissioners, they are all a part of this fight. One thing that I'll just end with to prove my point, a good friend, I think Sarah and Kerene definitely knows him as well, my good brother Whit Jones, got me aware of a local race in Seattle for port commissioner. And I was like, what is this gonna do? Well, we got that port commissioner elected, and through that process we were able to ban Shell from using the port of Seattle as a spot where they could get their ships ready, and that cost them a lot of money because they had to go all the way from Los Angeles all the way up to the Bering Straits to do what they wanted to do. So there's a lot of power at the local level, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, because sometimes we forget about that, and that's how we end up with things like insane transgender bathroom laws or stopping local communities from ending fracking. It's a constant struggle. It's a fight at all levels of government. And the more local we are, the more involved that we can get. But just lifting up everything that Sister Kerene and Sara said as well.
Great. Well, I would just say that, I mean, and to reinforce these points, I mean, as many people have said before, all politics are local and real politics comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. So this is really just to reinforce everything that the panelists have said, because it's so very important for making real change. I'm going to go to the questions now and just, I see we have questions here. Please feel free to add more to the chat as you see fit. I would just say here, I think that maybe the two questions that I see here that maybe the panelists want to speak to, we don't have that much time, is just there's one question about the degree to which capitalism is possible in a just, equitable form, which is not a small question, obviously. And this person suggests that capitalism may really be connected with oppression and harm, no matter the ways that people attempt to reform it. And so perhaps if you have a philosophical perspective on this, but a short philosophical perspective, I see Anthony's laughing. I mean, and then I would just say that I'm going to link this with one of the other questions that just came in, which is about the degree to which pricing carbon or putting a price on carbon is seen or using other market forces as a way of addressing the climate crisis, which basically works through the capitalist system, the degree to which the panelists think that that might be effective, or if you have thoughts on that. I'm sure everybody does, but let's try to make it somewhat short just so we don't go over time. Please.
I'll go ahead, Kerene. Sorry, sis.
My answer to both is, when have the markets ever taken care of people?
Yeah, I was just gonna, to what Kerene said, quote Chairman Fred Hampton, you can't fight capitalism with capitalism. As it pertains to taxation of carbon, it depends on what the scheme is. Check out the Climate and Community Investment Act, compare that to the Citizens Climate Lobby approach, and you'll have your answer.
Those were so short and sweet. Wow, I'm impressed. I'll just say, like, I think the short answer that probably we all share is no, capitalism probably cannot exist in a just, equitable form. But I will just note that as an organizer, it feels important to say for somebody out there that doesn't mean that, like, our demand that we organize around is end capitalism. I think there are more palpable and powerful ways to bring the millions of people that want to live in a more just world into our movements. And so that's just my 2 cents for whoever needs to hear that.
Great. Well, you know what I'm going to do is that we have a couple other comments here. Most of these are suggesting some great work by great people on specific bills or specific groups that are doing work, like Jewish Earth Alliance, Climate Action Network at multiple levels. And I would just say that there's lots and lots of ways that people can get involved. Obviously Dayenu, obviously WeAct, obviously Sunrise. There are lots of amazing organizations. And I think the most important message that has come through again and again from the panelists is that this is not a time to sit back and go and, feel like everything's going to just be okay without continuing to persist and to work towards the goal of addressing the climate crisis, because the first steps have been made, but there is, as I think it was Sara who said, this is a long march. It wasn't Sara, but anyway, it's a long march. We've got a lot of work to be done. Final thoughts before we wrap up. Maybe should we go backwards now? Sara, you go first, and we'll go just through one more time.
Sure. Yeah. I said something on this at the very start, but I think just final thought for all you awesome Jews out there is that it's more important than ever to be both visibly Jewish and visibly working in and alongside movements that are fighting for justice and liberation for all of our people right now. And I know that might feel extra scary or hard when, there's white nationalists in the street, but I believe in you and we can do it. And just would want to say, you know, we know from our history that the only way that that we are safe is when everybody is safe and free. So that's all.
Anthony?
Oh, sure. I would just repeat what Sarah said. 5,000 years of struggle and sustenance. We're still here. I say that as a Jew. I say that as an African as well. And it requires work. My mother used to say that fear leads to hesitation, and hesitation leads to the thing that you fear the most. And so we simply cannot hesitate right now. This is a global struggle for global people, and everyone has to do their part. And when we fight, we win.
I think I want to say trust and support Black-led and Latino-led, people of color-led organizations. I've said this before, we know the solutions that we want and to see. We just need that support to advocate for them. And I would say support Black women. I'm really proud of what happened in Georgia and the brilliance of all of the women who did that work. And we have to, support more of us getting into office. It's a travesty that with Kamala becoming VP, that there are no Black women in the Senate, and we need that representation. So there's some important candidates that need support. So as we think about the next cycle, support more Black women candidates and Black-led organizations. So thanks for your time.
These are a wonderful way to end with all of these comments. So thank you again to the panelists. And also thanks to the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest for organizing this hour conversation on our new climate context. And thank you so much for participating, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, y'all. That was amazing. I'm gonna go nosh now. I'm so hungry.
Thank you, everybody.
I gotta go walk in my living room. I need 4,500 more steps for the night. I'm gonna go walk in my living room.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.